In the spring of 1096, crusading armies swept through the Jewish communities of the Rhineland, leaving devastation in their wake. This class traces how those events gave rise to rituals of memory. In the community of Worms, fast days were proclaimed on the 23rd of Iyar and Rosh Chodesh Sivan, accompanied by elaborate mourning customs. And in 1716, when Rosh Chodesh Sivan fell on Friday, rabbinic authorities clashed over the ancient custom in Worms of davening Maariv early that afternoon, and we provide a summary of that topic. We conclude by tracing the demise of these fast days, while showing how other rituals, like the recitation of Av HaRachamim, have endured to this day. Rabbi Iyar Chaim Bachrach was a Rav in Worms in the late 1600s. And he has in his Chuvas, Shalsh Chuvas Chavas Iyar, Simin Kuf Chavav, where he tells the following: Achar Shenechrav Kilaseinu Bavainenu. After the destruction of our Kehillah of Worms, V'Shamei Mirenu, and our city became desolate. When was this? Sivan Tov Mem Tes, the year 1689. The Sha'alu, we'll learn more about this in a second. The Sha'alu, so actually not in a second, let's just talk about it right now. 1688 began what was known as the 9 Years' War. The 9 Years' War pitted France against others, including the Holy Roman Empire. Worms at the time is in the Holy Roman Empire. So right away, early on in the war, in 1688, toward the end of the year 1688, French forces come, they occupy Worms for a few weeks. In fact, there's another tshuva, the Chavas Iyar, about a case that happened during this initial phase of the occupation. In order to weaken these cities in the Holy Roman Empire, the French wanted to destroy the walls of these cities so that now you're less defended. So they wanted to blow a hole in the wall in Worms, and it made sense for them to do it in the area where the Jews lived. The Jews lived in the northern side of Worms, and they had houses literally adjacent to the wall. So the French commander is like, this is where I'm going to blow a hole into the wall. It's going to destroy 2 or 3 Jewish homes. So the shaila was, is it mutter for a yid? Let's say he thinks, they're coming in the morning, they're going to blow up a hole in the wall in that area. Could he say, pay them off, that they'll move down a block and do it somewhere else? Problem is another yid that lives over there. So is it mutter or not? So it's a tshuva that came to the Chavas Iyar, a shaila that came to the Chavas Iyar, and he paskin that once they decided they're doing it in a certain spot, you're not allowed to pay them to do it somewhere else, which connects to a topic that we discussed a few months ago in the sugya of conscription. When someone was selected, so are you allowed to pay your way out, even if it means someone else is going to be chosen as a result? So that was all in the end of the year 1688. Then you fast forward into 1689, Sivan 1689, and now the French decided scorched earth policy, they're destroying the entire city. So they destroy the entire city, and now it's not just a question of 2 or 3 homes, now it's everyone, Jews and non-Jews. And this is the matziv when the next question comes to the Chavas Iyar. Shalu b'nei kila kadosha, and members of the community, shenispazru kivim Israel, who were spread out all over the place. So they were in different places, so we don't know exactly where they are. We don't know where exactly the Chavas Iyar is. But they asked the shaila, what was the shaila? Are they still obligated to keep the unique fasts that are observed by the Jewish community of Worms? We'll learn more about what these fasts are now, but first, let's understand the question. What was the argument? Because it's been made desolate from the French government. And everyone has given up, Jews and non-Jews, that it's ever going to happen, that we're ever going to go back and that we're ever going to be able to rebuild this place. It was a 9-year war. Presumably during the 9 years of fighting, they never were able to rebuild the city of Worms. And that's a long time. And so people said it's never going to happen. It's still in the middle of a war. And even if peace comes, who knows if the city will be rebuilt, and even if the city is rebuilt, who knows when Jews will return to it. And therefore, some of them wanted to say in the various towns and villages that they were in at the time, that maybe all of it, the unique minhagim of worms, are gone, are destroyed. You don't have to observe them anymore because the city no longer exists, the Kehillah no longer exists, and maybe even it will not be re-established. And even if one day it's going to be restored, there is no obligation to keep the unique minhagim. Why? Because it's a new city. It's as if you came to America and you established a new city, so there's no minhag hamakim, right? So worms, after this destruction, is also, it's like America. There's no minhag hamakim. Panim chadashas balakan. And therefore the people were saying, we don't have to keep these fasts. There were some other customs beyond fasts as well that were unique to the Kehillah and worms. We don't have to do this anymore. V'hishafti lahem, and I responded, ki lo ykeinu. Absolutely not. Even if some people gave up and assumed they're never going to return to worms, basar tzibur greiru. These matters of whether minhag hamakim still sticks or not goes by the community at large, not any one individual. And when it comes to the community at large, they have not given up on their community. And wars and countries fighting with each other, it happens all the time, but let's not get anxious and carried away. Saifan Shalom. This is going to end. I know it's hard for you, he's telling his people to imagine this now. It's going to end. And that's for a regular city. How much more so Iyar Yisrael, a very special city. This is a lashon from the Sefer Shmuel, where this is used. Iyar Yisrael, such a big city, it's like a mother. Just like a mother supports children, so too a large city supports the small villages around it. So it's an Iyar Yisrael, and it's an ancient Kehillah. By the time you're in the late 60s, 90s, the Kehillah of worms has been established for centuries and centuries prior. And we have the Sefer Torah, and we have the Klei Kodesh, and very important for these Kehillahs, to have the Pinkasei Hakol. And it's all Skurim Umuvrachim. We took it out of the city, and they're hiding somewhere. And we know exactly where they are. The Torahs are accounted for, and the Klei Kodesh, not entirely sure what the Klei Kodesh are, but that's also accounted for. And the Pinkasei Kol is this is the ledger, the community ledger, where they would document the takanos and the minhagim and the yard sites and many other important matters were there. So what does that show? L'chein havei daitam lachzor. So it means they're coming back. And so therefore, all of these takanos are in force. Which would mean, I don't know exactly, when people are away, they're away in other communities, so then that gets into another sugya of your minhag against the other local minhag and how to navigate that. But the bottom line is, when they're going to come back, that's for sure, all of these minhagim and the tanesim are going to have to come back. And now our question is, what are these tanesim that he is talking about? So in order to understand the history of the tanesim in worms, we need to go back many centuries to the late 1000s, to the year 1096, which is the story of the Crusades. We spoke about the Crusades last week in the context of their control of Eretz Yisrael, but it's a European story before it becomes a Middle Eastern story, and as is well remembered in Jewish consciousness, tremendous suffering that came to European Jewry as a result. So our information in terms of internal Jewish sources about the brutality in Europe comes from three different accounts that were written sometime in the 1100s. So again, the Crusades is a Maisa of 1096. Sometime around 50 years later, 60 years later, 40 years later, there were three individuals who lived in that region, and they wrote chronicles about what happened. The most famous of the three was written by a man named Reb Shloimeh ben Shimon, and he gives a date of what year he's writing. He says that he's writing in the year 1140 Liminyanam. That's when he's writing, and it's the place where this is most usually quoted from is a book printed in 1946 that collected all of these different pieces. It's called Gzeres Ashkenaz v'Tzarfas. Okay, so we're going to be reading his account over here. It's a very, very long account. We're just going to be reading a few bits and pieces that are going to be relevant for our purposes. Vayhi barbas halafim was in the year 4000, Shmeina Meis, 856 shana and 56 years, which in the secular way of counting, Liminyanam, is 1096. Or in other words, this is exactly 930 years ago from today. Shnas Elef ve'esrim u'shmeina legaluseinu. It is 1,028 years to galus, meaning if you make the cheshbon, he's counting the Churban from the year 68 of the Common Era, which some people do. Sometimes people count 69. Sometimes people count 70. He's counting 68 over here. A sugya for another time. Okay. The French and Germans arose. This is the non-Jewish population. If I recall correctly, the First Crusade was announced by the Pope in France, and so it actually begins in France, but then it spills over into Germany. We're going to Jerusalem. To find the kever of their founder. He just uses pejorative term. To expel the Arabs who dwell there. And to conquer the land, which we know eventually they were successful in doing. As we spoke about last time, they conquered Yerushalayim in 1099 and held on to Yerushalayim for almost 100 years. And even after they lost Yerushalayim, they kept other areas in the north of Eretz Yisrael for another while thereafter. As they're passing through the cities that have Jews, one said to another, we're traveling very far, to find, the place of our founder, and to exact revenge from the Muslims. But the Jews are right here. And they killed our founder, and they crucified him for no reason. So first, let's take revenge from them. Wipe them out from being a people. And the name Yisrael should not be mentioned. Or they should convert. And they should admit and believe and profess in the validity of the son of, referring to Yeshua HaNotzri over here. Okay. We skip a little, and now he tells us about 3 cities. This is his primary focus here is on 3 cities. And he starts with the first one, which happened b'Shmeina b'Iyar on Ches Iyar, which was b'Yoyim HaShabbos. So that's the same feast as this year. This past Shabbos was Ches Iyar. Kamu ha'evim al kahal Spira. So the enemies rose up against the city of Speyer. Speyer is in Germany, and it forms one of 3 kehillas, which during the period of the Rishonim was known as Kilos Shum. Shum as in Speyer, Varmaiza, and Magenza. And these 3 communities, if I recall correctly, Magenza is most south, Worms a little north of that, and Speyer more north from that. It's in the general area of Frankfurt in Germany. It's known as the Rhineland, because sitting on the Rhine River, these towns and cities. So on that day, Vayargo Bahem, they killed in Speyer, Achas Esrei Nefashes Kedeshes, 11. They killed 11 people. And then there was a Isha Chashuva V'Chasida, was an important woman. And she took her own life, it says. V'shachata atzma al Kiddush Hashem, which is another topic we once spoke about at great length. When we spoke about the issue of Metzada, we spoke about the halachic matter as it is related to the Crusader period, when Jews in Ashkenaz sometimes took their own life in order to avoid the Nisayan of, am I going to pass the Nisayan or not? Maybe I'm going to save my life later on. We spoke about it then, Ayin Sham. Okay, that was on Ches Iyar. Over Chav Gimel Be'Iyar, the 23rd Iyar, Kamu al Kahor Varmaiza. Now they came to Worms. V'Hakol Nechlaku L'Shnei Kitos, and the Jewish community divided in 2. Some of them stayed at home, and some of them went to the Hegmon, to the bishop, or to some other nobleman or something like that. And so they attacked those who were in their homes. The people who went to the Hegmon were safe for now. But those who stayed home, they ended up being attacked and they were robbed. Doesn't specify here that they were murdered, but it becomes clear from the context and from other places as well. They also took the Sefer Torah and they trampled upon it in dirt. They tore it, they burnt the Torah. That all happened on Chav Gimel Iyar in Worms. And then you had 7 days later on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. So here it says that he brings the story now to those who are in the cheder of the Hegmon. And basically the fortification was broken and they were attacked. And they were attacked just like the first one, and they were killed. V'lo yashiru me'em, they didn't let them survive. Zulasi ma'at miz'er, only a few. Ashar unto, they forced v'itbilum, and they baptized them ba'al karcham b'meit sachanosam, in their sullied waters. Okay, so they had a few people forced to convert, and those people said nominally, yes, I'm going to do it, because they said no, they were killed. But it's a relatively speaking small number of people. And what's the number of the dead? It's 800 people killed in these 2 days in Worms, in Varmaiza, Chav Gimel Iyar, and Rosh Chodesh Sivan in the year 1096. Okay, and now the story turns to Mainz. Mainz was the biggest of the 3 cities, and he spends the most time talking about Mainz. In fact, he has a whole arichas of the story of how it all went down. And if you're interested, you maybe take a look and see his report over there. We don't have the time to get into all the details, so we're just going to read a few lines. That's how you said Mainz was Magensa. And look at this pun. Magain vitzina l'chol hakilos. Magensa. Magain vitzina. So this means a shield and protection for all the kehilos. So Mainz was the bigger of the 3 towns. And also Mainz had a fortress. It was known as the fortress of Mainz. Worms and Speyer, as far as I know, did not have the fortress. But I don't think that's what he means when he talks about the Magain and Vitzina l'chol hakilos. From a Jewish perspective, the greatest Rabbanim lived in Mainz. Rabbeinu Gershom Agoyla lived in Mainz. And so there were more people there, probably more Torah there, probably more yeshivas there. And that's why he's calling it a Magain and Vitzina l'chol hakilos. Okay, so they decided that they are going to pay their way out of this problem. So they're going to give a lot of money and give sheikhad to the different ministers, but at the end, it didn't work. And he finishes off this section by saying that when there was the Akedas Yitzchak, and one person was about to be killed, heaven started making noise, Hayatachin, and the Malachim were yelling, and it was a whole to-do. And here, how come the Shemayim didn't darken when you literally had not only potentially, but Poyal Mamish, Neragu v'nishchatu b'yoyim echad, on one day, b'gimel Sivan, that was the day that happened in Mainz. B'yoyim Gimel, and it was a Tuesday. And how many were lost? 1,100 people, and yet life continued on as usual. So these are the few lines that we're going to be reading from this account. Again, composed sometime in the 1100s. It's dated to 1140. So it's about 44 years after these events would have happened. Okay, now on Tisha B'Av, there is more than one of the keynotes that is the custom of Nusach Ashkenaz and Chabad to say, relate to the events with the Crusades. If I recall correctly, it's 2 or 3 at least. But the most famous of them is Kina Chav Hei, which is Mi Yitein Roshi Mayim. And as we're going to see, in this Kina of Mi Yitein Roshi Mayim, the author, whose name is Herkleines ben Yehuda, who lived in Mainz at the time of 1096, he was there, he's going to talk about these 3 kehillas. He's going to talk about, in the order, he's going to talk about Speyer, he's going to talk about Worms, and he's going to talk about Mainz. So let's read some of these words. It's obviously a difficult Paitani Hebrew that sometimes is hard to break down, but we'll try our best. So Mi Yitein Roshi Mayim, if only my head was full of water, ve'eni mekar nozayin, if only my eyes could become a source of dripping. In other words, if only I could cry endlessly. Ve'efke kol yamaysav elela, I'll then cry day and night. Achal tapai va'alolai, on the corpses of the children and the young ones, v'yisheshe kahalai, and the elders of the community. We're not going to read the whole thing, just a few of the highlights. So this point where he turns to the events that happened, va'koinein mar, I'm going to wail in a bitter voice, alei haruge ashpira, for the murdered ones of Speyer. Now what's interesting here is you're going to see, when he's going to talk about Worms, he's going to talk about Mainz, he's going to talk about the destruction of the Kehillah. He doesn't do that here for Speyer. He just talks about haruge ashpira. He at no point does he talk about the destruction of the Kehillah, and you already know the reason why. Because it was 11, I don't want to use the word only when it comes to life, but it was 11 that were killed. So he doesn't see 11 killed as a destruction of a Kehillah, so he talks about them as haruge ashpira. Basheni, when did this happen? Basheni in the 2nd month, that's Iyar. B'shmoinavoy, ches, that's what we had. B'yoim margoya hukra, it happened b'yoim margoya. What's margoya? The calm day. What's the calm day? Shabbos. Happened on Shabbos. Margoya lirgoya nechlefu. So from a margoya, from calmness, Lirgoya. Lirgoya is persecution. So the calm is changed to persecution, lahavira, okay? Nergu bachure chemed v'yisheshe hadara, and young people and older people were killed. Yichadu shem b'gvura, they died for Achtas Hashem. Kula Masara, and it says there were 10. So there's obviously a conflict here between the other source that had 11 and the one that said here 10. Ich weiß nicht. Okay, then he moves on to talk about Varmaisa, worms. Uvamar yegoini va'atzvi yalla lachbira, and with my bitter sighing and with a sad yalala, I'm going to make a chibur, I'm going to compose something. Kehilas HaKodesh, for the communities. Harigasam hayoim bezachra, and I'm going to mention them today. I'm going to remember them today. Kahal Varmaiza, Bechuna of Chura, the very chosen and important Kehila of worms. Goine Eretz Unakiye Tara, geniuses, holy people. Pamayim, 2 times. Kichu Shem Amyucha B'Mer, they had Kiddush Hashem on 2 days. The first was Be'eser Mushleisha B'Chodesh Ziv L'Tara, the 23rd Chodesh Ziv. So in Tanakh, it gives usually a month is Chodesh Rishon, Sheni, Shlish, Revi. There's a few months that get a name in Tanakh. We're used to Tishrei Chodesh. That's not Tanakh, that's later. So where do we, Megillas Esther or whatever, but it's after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash. Where do we have names in earlier Tanakh is only a Sanim for Tishrei, Ziv for Cheshvan, Bul for Cheshvan, and Ziv for Iyar. So that's the word he's using over here. It was 23 B'chodesh Ziv, Uvachodesh Hashlishi, and then Uvachodesh the 3rd month, but he doesn't mean that, because remember, when it says in the Torah, Bachodesh Hashlishi, it says, how do we teach? We teach that pasuk to mean Berosh Chodesh. So when he says Uvachodesh Hashlishi, he means Berosh Chodesh, B'kriyas Halal Asher, when we were singing Halal. Hishlimu Nafsham Ba'ava Kshura, that's when they paid with their lives, and they were tied with love to Hashem. Okay, so that's his description of worms. Valadire Kahal Magensa Ha'adura, and now he talks about the titans of the Jewish community of mines. Minshorin Kalu Me'aroyos Lias Gabra, they were stronger than lions and more swift than eagles. Hishlimu Nafsham Yichud Shem HaNoira, and they again paid with their lives for Yichud Hashem. And then he goes on to talk about the Churban of the Shuls. Ma'at Mikdasha Yumidr Torah. So the Mikdash Ma'at and the Batei Medrash were also destroyed. When did it happen? B'chodesh Hashlishi, Bashlishi. The 3rd month, on the 3rd day. In other words, on Gimel Sivan, that's when this destruction happened in mines. And he says, HaChodesh Asher Nepach LeYogain L'Tzara. This is a month that's a happy month. Sivan is a happy month. And yet it turned to a month of sorrow. And then he has lines further here that have this idea the month is where the Torah was given to us. But instead, what happened during this month in the year 1096 is the Torah went back to Hashem, because all of the Loin Day Torah were killed and perished. So instead of the Torah coming to us, the Torah returns back to Hashem. Okay. Later on in this piyut, Reb Kleinemius has the following lines, which has received a lot of attention over the last, since World War II. What are these lines? It says like this: because we're not going to add a time of shever v'savera, a time of a day of sorrow, because we're not going to add a day of sorrow. And you can't bring it up, but you only can make it later. So therefore, tachas kain, instead of that, hayoim, today, presuming that he means Tisha B'Av, which is when we read it, livyasi al-eros, that's why I'm speaking about this today, and that's why I'm making the hesped today, and I'm moaning about this today, and I'm crying b'nefesh mara about this today. Okay, he seems to be talking about the scheduling of a potential day to commemorate the victims of the Crusade. But the exact meaning of what he's saying over here, of why it wasn't done, has been subject to a lot of disagreement, and I'll tell you 2 ways of reading this. Way number 1 is the way that Chassam Sofer tells us to read it. Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva where he reads these words as well, like this: you're not allowed to add fast, period. Ein lohoisif moyed shever v'savera. There's halacha. The halacha is that we fast on certain days. You don't add fasts. If it's not in the calendar from at a certain time, I don't know when the clock stopped, but at a certain time, the book stopped, we don't add any more fasts. Ein lohoisif moyed shever v'savera. Okay, good. So that's all of a sudden, that's going to have major implications, because it means you're not allowed to add fasts. And then if you're going to say, should we make a fast after the Holocaust? You're not allowed to make a fast. Okay. The problem with that is going to be the fact that Jews made many fasts. In fact, as we're going to see, they made fasts for the Crusades. And they made other fasts for other events as well. But fine, this is one way of reading it. You're not allowed to make another fast. Okay, then how do you read the next words? So the Chassam Sofer learns Taich like this. So you're not allowed to make a fast. You were not allowed to make another fast. Okay, so I have an idea. Let's move Tisha B'Av to Chav Gimel Iyar. Let's move Tisha B'Av to Chav Gimel Iyar, and in that way you get to kill two birds with one stone in this way. He says, no, you can't do that. You can't be makdim a fast. And so therefore we have no choice. Reb Kleinus ben Yehuda was saying, I'm not allowed to make a new fast. I can't bring Tisha B'Av to here, so en malasat, we're going to bring here to Tisha B'Av. That's the way the Chassam Sofer learns Pshat in this Kina. It's very difficult to imagine that he's writing like this, a Havamina, that we would move Tisha B'Av. It's very hard to imagine this, but this is what he says. I mean, otherwise a person has to figure out what's he saying here. What's he saying here? Okay, now after the war, the Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, who was the chief rabbi in Eretz Yisrael, so he addressed this issue, and he wasn't against, at least mitzad this, I don't remember all the details, but at least mitzad this, he wasn't against making a new fast day. He said, no, you're reading the whole thing wrong. He said, that's not how you read. The way you need to read it is like this, that ein lo hoisif, like you have to read it, ein lo hoisif bizman hamoyed shever v'savera. Because Shavuos is a Yom Tov, and you're not allowed to make fast during the period of the Yom Tov, so you can't bring a tainus into Azman of Amoyed. Is it the perfect reading? I'm not going to argue. Firstly, you have to be a Baki in Piyutim. But secondly, I don't know. But this is what he says. That you can't, so now the Shaila is, okay, so you can't do it so then bring it up to Iyar. Bring it up to Iyar. So don't do it Rosh Chodesh Sivan. And don't do it on Gimel Sivan, which are 2 days. Bring it up to Iyar. No, you don't do it early. Ein lahaktim. You're not allowed to bring fast early. You have to do it later. By the way, I didn't explain before. It's a klal on Shas. Whenever Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, when do we fast? We fast Sunday. Why don't we fast Thursday? No, because you're not makdim a piranus. You always do it later. That's the operating principle. So here he's saying that, no, you're not allowed to bring it up to Chodesh Iyar, and so therefore we left it for later. We left it for Tisha B'Av or whatever it is. So the difference, so Tainus Esther we bring up early. Okay.
Because of Purim, we're not allowed. Right. It's not perennial. It's not perennial. It's not perennial.
The opposite. It's interesting because the Gemara, when it's talking about Tisha B'Av, the opposite is the Megillah. Because Megillah, the Hoysafa is Yeralf Yibez Yigimel. Why? Because Simcha you bring up, Peronius you push later. Okay. But so the bottom line is, all I'm doing is I'm flagging this. I'm flagging these lines over here. That some people say that from here, clearly what you see is he's talking about a scheduling issue. That's pretty clear. What exactly he's saying is a little less clear. Some have said no fast whatsoever. That's what he's saying over here. Some said no, it doesn't mean no fast whatsoever. It was just saying is, what are we supposed to do? We can't do it in Sivan, we can't do it earlier in Iyar. So you know what? We'll just push it off to Tisha B'Av. But as we're going to see in a few minutes, fasts were definitely declared, but we'll get there in a minute. Okay. Now, the next thing we want to do at this point is talk about Rashi. Rashi was alive during this period in time. But notice, when we spoke about the 3 places that suffered, they're on the Rhineland. It's further east from where Rashi is. Rashi is in France. And in fact, French Jewry did not suffer, as far as we can tell, during the First Crusade. It was an issue, though it starts in France, but the persecution of the Jews began during their journey in Germany. In fact, in one of the 3 accounts, they report there that news of the Crusades began with letters that Jews in France sent to Jews on the Rhineland, saying, watch out, this looks very, very scary, and we're scared. And so such a letter was sent, but nothing happened to the Jews of France as far as we can tell. Rashi was alive then. Rashi was living then. So is there any yachas overt from Rashi to the Crusades? Overt and clear, 100% definitive, no. There's a few things that people have pointed to. So we're going to look at one specific case. So there's a tshuva from Rashi that's quoted by many of the Rishonim. Al dvar ha'alma sheneskacha leish, there's a woman who became a kodeshes to a man. Ushneim hayu anusim, and both of them were anusim. Lavar al teres Moshe degoim. They were both forced to go against Judaism through non-Jews. The Gama Edim and also the Edim were also on the same boat. So it looks like there was a group of people, so it's not just one person, and it's not just 2, it's a minimum of 4 people. So, again, there were people, stories of Jews forced to convert happen from time to time. But when you have 4 people are forced to convert, and it's Rashi, so maybe people are like, maybe it's something that happens in Germany, and the Shaila comes to Rashi in France. Is it definitive proof? Absolutely not. And it could have been just a random, more local story or something like that. So what was the Maisa? The Maisa was they were forced to convert to Christianity, and they did nominally, but they're still living as Jews clandestinely, whatever it is. So they want to get married, and then they do Kedushin. They bring 2 witnesses, they know the dinner, okay, the ring, everything. And now the shaila is this Kedushin Chal? So whatever, they return to Yiddishkeit, and the shaila is, does she need a get? They don't want to live together anymore. So Zak the Rashi, she needs a get. Why? But when the Kedushin happened, the guy was a Meshumad. Shaf Yisrael Meshumad L'Eretz Sinai Shekiddush. Even if a Yid is a Meshumad L'Eretz Sinai, his Kedushin is Kedushin. Why? Because he's a Yid. Why? Because we have the Gemara in Sanhedrin that brings a pasuk in Yeshua that says Chata Yisrael, and the Gemara touches up Afal Pisha Chata Yisraelu, and so therefore he's Yisrael. Zedin Yisrael says Kedushin is a Kedushin. This, as far as I know, is the first time Afal Pisha Chata Yisrael who is used in a halachic context in this specific way. Meaning like this. The Gemara clearly says, but in context what it means is, though the Jewish people as a whole have sinned, in the story of Yerichai, nonetheless, Yisraelu, I'm still calling the people as a whole Yisrael. Okay, that makes sense. Even though they did the Egel, they're still Yisrael. Even though the sin of Yerichai happened, the collective is still called Yisrael. Rashi is not learning Pshat that way in the Gemara over here. Rashi is learning Pshat on the Yachid, on the Yechidim. That each Yachid is a din of Yisrael, and he uses a halacha l'maisa to therefore say it's a din of a Yid, and so therefore Kiddush of Kiddush. That would be even if he was a Meshumad L'Eretz Sinai. Kol shekein anusim libam l'shamayim, if they were forced, so then Mamish Zikr is a Yisraelu, and so therefore his Kiddushin is a Kiddushin. And the Edom as well. He's learning that way in the Edom. Even though the Edom are l'chayra maybe have the din of Rishayim, because you're not supposed to. It's yehareg v'al yavar when a person's in that situation, so it's a sin. And Edom who do something like that maybe are apostle le'edos, but he learns nisht. He's like, no, because they're anusim libam lashamayim, and it's a oinus, they're not going to become apostle le'edos. And he goes and look. At the end of here, we know the end of the story. And the end of the story proved the beginning. They returned. When they were able to, they ran away and they were moved to a place where they were able to live and practice as Jews. Because officially, according to Christian law, you're not supposed to force someone to convert. But if you force someone, even with the sword, but they said, okay. So like if you squeeze until you force them begashmis to say, I want to do it, so that's coercion, is not recognized. But if you just threaten them, so then Christian law, as far as I understand it, recognize that as voluntary. And so therefore, in living in these local places, they would have had to continue living as a Christian due to Christian law. But these people, they yatsu misham, they left. They ran away and they returned to Judaism. And so you're able to see that really the whole time they weren't serious about this. And so therefore, the Edom are kosher, and he's a kosher Yid, the Kedushin is a Kedushin, and all of that. And as I said before, some have suggested that maybe this is connected in one way or another with the Crusader persecutions. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to talk about different minhagim and dinim that arose from this tragedy. So number one, we're going to turn to the Maariv. The Maariv lived in the late 1600s and in the late 1300s and the early 1400s in, if I recall correctly, in Mainz. In Mainz, that's where he was, one of these kehillas. And he writes like this: B'chol Medinas Rhinus, the whole Rhineland and all of this whole province, this whole area. Ein oimrim Av HaRachamim. Av HaRachamim is not said. Ella b'Shabbos lifnei Shavuos. It's only said once a year. It's only said twice a year. You'll see in a second. It's only said once a year. Shabbos before Shavuos. Why? The Maskirin, Asakdoshim, Begzedas, Tuf, Nun Vav. Because then we mention the names. You're going to see they had the names. They mentioned the names of the people who were killed in the year 1096. And associated with that, we say Av HaRachamim. Av HaRachamim was said once a year, the Shabbos before Shavuos, which was mamish this kufa. This kufa of Rosh Chodesh Sivan was the second turn in Worms, and Gimel Sivan was in Mainz. Then he goes on to say in Shabbos Chazon Yeshayahu, then we also mention the names all over again, Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, and then again we say Av HaRachamim. So the bottom line is, the Maariv is telling us that in the Rhineland, in the early 1400s, Av HaRachamim is said on 1 or 2 Shabbos of the year. So people look at that and say, that's interesting, because we don't know exactly who wrote Av HaRachamim. We don't. And we don't know when exactly it was written. But if you see the Maariv writing in the early 1400s that it's being read, it's being done only in the Tkufa of the Crusaders, meaning on the yard side, maybe that's when this tefillah was written. Maybe it was written behemshech to the Crusades, and the minig was to read it in the time of the yard side, the Shabbos before Shavuos. And it's very clear that the minig to do it at other times of the year evolved later. It's been going on for centuries, but that happened at a later point. And in fact, if you ask the question, where is the very first source that mentions the Av HaRachamim? So it's not the 1400s, you could go earlier. How much earlier you could go? So you could go into the 1200s. Into the 1200s, there's a Ksav Yad that numerous scholars have quoted. It's called Parma 655. And this Ksav Yad in Parma 655 was written by someone, it's not entirely clear, sometime in the 1200s. And he writes over there that we say Av HaRachamim when? Between every Shabbos, between Pesach and Shavuos. But only between Pesach, that's it. Every Shabbos between Pesach and Shavuos. So you see, that also sounds, and that's the first source that talks about it. And so, again, it lends itself to the idea that it has to do with the Crusaders. Okay, so that's number one, Av HaRachamim. Now you come to another whole major topic. You can spend a lot of time on this. That has to do with the mourning during the period of Sfiras Omer. Because this topic is a big mess. Because there's many different shittas of when does it start and when does it stop. And so much has been said about this. So the Taz holds in Ur Chaim, Simon Tov Tzad Gimel, and many agree with him, that the primary days of mourning is from the first day of Sfiras Omer until Lag BaOmer. That is Ikar. Pasku Melamos, when did Talmidei Rabbi Akiva stop passing away? Although it says Pesach Vadateres in the Gemara, it was Pasku Melamos happened when? Lag BaOmer. And if you follow that reasoning, all of the mourning and all that sad stuff should be when? From after Pesach until Lag BaOmer, and that's it. And after should be clear for anything you want. You can have weddings, you can take haircuts, and everything should be fine. And so it's a struggle, many have struggled. Why are we not doing that? So some have explanations about, no, there's a different way of calculating the days. Maybe the days of mourning begin later, and so it covers that. But this is a very messy subject. So the Taz, what the Taz does is he says, no. It's the first one. It's from the first 33 days of Sfiras Omer. And that's it. After we're still mourning, he says, the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva didn't die after Lag BaOmer. After Lag BaOmer, all the way up to Shavuos. Why? Because the Gzeira is Tov Nun Vav, the year 1096. That was in Ashkenaz, and that happened between Pesach La'atzeres. How do I know? I didn't know what sources of the Taz have to have the dates. So the way he knew this was from the Piyutim and the Yotzris that they said, because there were Piyutim and Yotzris that were said in Ashkenaz during those Shabbos, and many of them are very sad, and many of them talk about persecution. So he was able to tell from there that it happened during this time of the year, and he says that is the reason for why we don't make chasanas after Lag BaOmer. It's a very, very interesting theory, and if that's the case, if this is true, so then that means that the legacy and the observance of this period is very much alive and well with us today. But we spoke about fast before. No fast? Yes, fasts. Where do we see that? From the Rekeach. The Rekeach lived in the late 1100s, early 1200s in Worms. He's known Rabbi Lazar, Rekeach Migermaiza. And in Sefer HaRekeach he writes that in Worms there's a Misanin al Gzeira Shahaya Rosh Chodesh Sivan. See, he doesn't say what Gzeira, but we know Rosh Chodesh Sivan was the day that the second of the 2 days that Worms was attacked, and so we assume that's what it means. And he says, now this is very odd. You should notice the Chiddush. Rosh Chodesh, you're not supposed to fast. And Rosh Chodesh is a Freiliche Tag. And Rosh Chodesh is Halal. And Rosh Chodesh is a Kriya for Rosh Chodesh. So he says, in the morning, they read Taka, the Kriya Rosh Chodesh. And then Mincha, they're reading Vayechal, and they're doing the Haftarah of Dirshu, and that's what they're doing in Worms on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. And other sources tell us that in Mines, they were doing this on Gimel Sivan. Okay, now we're going to get a much richer and more comprehensive account of what this fast looked like on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. But the emes is, we're going to move now into the 1600s, and we're going to see suddenly a fast on the 23rd of Iyar is also going to pop up, which was the first day. The Rekech doesn't talk about a fast on Chav Gimel Iyar, so I have to imagine that it wasn't there then. But I wonder if at a later point someone said, why are we only fasting on Rosh Chodesh? Maybe we should also fast on Chav Gimel Iyar. And so a fast developed for Chav Gimel Iyar as well. So all this information comes from the Sefer we've quoted numerous times recently. If you remember the class that we did on wine with this whole crazy system for selling wine, it came from this Rabbi Yusuf Shamish, who lived in the 1600s, and he wrote the Sefer Menhagin Dekilas Kayedish Varmaiza, a very, very important source. It's pushed out a window into how the Jewish community operated at the time. So let's read his account. So he says, our minig is that we fast the tainus of the Gzeira, Tuf Nun Vav, the Gzeira of 1096, Bechaf Gimel Iyar, on the 23rd of Iyar. So here's the Seder, on the 22nd of Iyar before Mincha, they changed the mappa. The mappa is the mantle on the Torah. Uparoiches is hanging on the Aron Kodesh. Umachsois, this is what they covered the Stender and the Bima. So they changed it, and it's come very clear later. They changed it to what? They had a designated one for Tisha B'Av. And this designated one for Tisha B'Av was black. Okay? So this is pretty gloomy. All right. And it stays there even on Shabbos. It stays from Chav Beis Iyar after Mincha till after Rosh Chodesh Sivan, because you know already there's going to be two fasts. One Chav Gimel Iyar, one Rosh Chodesh Sivan, so it's staying there. And we read Vayachal, and Maskirin Neshamas HaKadoshim HaNe'arogim, Poi Kila Kadosh Varmaiza, Boi B'yem B'Gzeres Taf Nun Vav. On this fast day, we read the names. They had the names. Everyone who was killed on Chav Gimel Iyar, they had the names, and they read it out. I'll show you some of them soon. All right, when we leave Shul, we go to the Beis HaChaim, and they encircle the Beis HaChaim, the historic cemetery in Worms. It's still there, Ad Hayoim. And when they come to the Kvarim of those who were murdered on that day, then they say special tchinos that were designated for this purpose. Then he says, we don't make parties from Chav Gimel Iyar till after Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Now, what does that mean? According to halacha, mitzad dinei sfiras oimer, you're allowed to make a suda for engagement or a simchas mereyos, a friendly gathering, as long as there's no dancing. Here they said, no, they're not doing any of that. They're not doing any of that because it's like their period of the 3 weeks. It's less than 3 weeks, but it's their period of time of mourning. But you're allowed to make a milah, pidyon aben, etc. Okay, then you have the Shabbos between Chav Gimel Iyar and Rosh Chodesh Sivan. This was known as the Shabbos Shabein Beis Gzeiros. It's the fourth Shabbos after Rosh Chodesh Iyar. So we don't wear the Sarvel Shal Shabbos. There's a certain garment they would only wear on Shabbos. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but we don't wear it. Only we wear our weekday clothes, and that's for men and women. Okay, then he talks about the Psukei de Zimra. On that Shabbos, we don't sing it in the Nigun of Shabbos, B'Nigun Shachol. And only one person reads it. They don't do Shnayim, B'Chalif, and Pasuk. In other words, on a regular Shabbos in Worms, is a little window into the minhag of the community. They had two people. One guy said, and then the next guy said, and it just, went back and forth. That's really nice. Well, that's Simcha, so they didn't do it on this Shabbos. Okay, then it comes to the fact that the Shabbos Mavarchim, it's Mavarchim Sivan. Mavarchim HaChodesh, and right away, Maskirin Neshamas, we mention all these Neshamas again. Neshamas HaKadoshim, Mipoikilas Kodesh Varmaiza Shal Gzeiros, the different ones that were killed by different Gzeiros. And then we mention all of the Neshamas HaKadoshim from all of the Kilas and all the Medinas of 1096. Okay, so he mentions three things here. We mention the dead. We mention the dead of different Gzeiros. Sounds like he's saying after 1096 as well. And then we mention all the dead from 1096, which means Worms, Mainz, Speyer, but also other places, Cologne, and there were other cities where Jews were murdered as well. They had all day, and they were reading names. Okay. However, on a regular Shabbos Mavarchim, we don't do this. We don't mention the Shabbos on a regular Shabbos Mavarchim. But this Shabbos Mavarchim Sivan, is different. Okay. So what is this list of names? So this list of names, a list survived. And it was printed in 1880. Someone published Kuntris Varmaiza V'Kahol Vina. And he has here a list. I'm not going to read the whole list, but just to give you a small taste. It says, Haruge Kilis Kodesh Varmaiza, B'Shleish V'Asim L'Chodesh Iyar, the one that happened on the 23rd year, in the year Taf Nun Vav, L'Elef HaChamishi, which is the year 1096, Eila Shmaisa. And here's the text. Yiskar L'Kimis Nishmas, me remember Rabbeinu, Shloima V'Ishtoi. So the Shloima and his wife. Shimshon Uvnoisav, Shimshon and his daughters. Maras Rivka, Lady Rivka. You see, it does it like families like that. will do a man and his wife, or a man and his kids. And then here it just says Maris Rivka, Almanas Rav Moshe of Bnei the Almana of Rav Moshe and the daughters. Okay, now you go all the way to the end. Mar Shmaria, the Ishtai, his wife, Uvanov, Shloisha, and his 3 sons, Shashachad al Kiddush Hashem. He killed them. Al Kiddush Hashem. This brings back to that topic, that preemptive homicide and suicide that was being committed at the time. Again, brings us back to the subject that's not ours today. Most names do not have that. Most names do not have Shachat Asmai, but you have it by a few of them. I don't remember. It's a nice number. It's hard to count the names because they're clusters and families. So it's hard to know the exact number of names over there. And then it ended, their souls, the schar, the tzedakah that we're going to give, presumably, their souls will be bound with the ultimate source of life, with all the other tzaddikim and tzidkanias and Gan Eden and Noimar Omen. So that's the one for Chaf Gimel Iyar. Okay, now you come to Rosh Chodesh Sivan. So Rabbi Yuspa continues his account and he says, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, well again we have fast Tainis Sibur, and we do Baruchu and Arvis and Shachris in the weekday Niggin, not in the Rosh Chodesh Niggin. You hear this? They used to have a Baruchu for Rosh Chodesh. I want bring that back. Why don't we have a Baruchu for Rosh Chodesh anymore? There's a lot of minhagim that you see the decorum in the shul and the choreography is amazing. Okay, the Kohen Vayachal Mincha, and then we're reading Vayachal Mincha. Remember, we're reading Rosh Chodesh in the morning, we're reading Vayachal by Mincha. Then we go back to the cemetery in the morning, and V'holchin al Kivrei Yud Beis Parnasim. We go to the Kfarim of the 12 Parnasim leaders of the community, and we say special tchinos for the Kedoshim, for the martyrs at these Kfarim. So this is an interesting thing. The accounts that survive from the 1100s don't tell us any unique story about Yud Beis Parnasim, or at least I didn't see them, but there are in later sources stories that during 1096 there's something happened with Yud Beis Parnasim and different accounts of what exactly happened, so I'm not going to get into that right now. And they were ultimately buried in one area in the Beis HaKfaris in Worms. And in the 1800s, an old matzeva was discovered that says the words Yud Beis Parnasei Taf Taf Nun Vav. So this was a thing, and you can see in the 1600s they're still going there and they're still reading the Tchinas over there. Okay, now Rosh Chodesh, you're not allowed to fast. So if you're not allowed to fast Rosh Chodesh, this fast is not going to be realized all the way to the end of the day. It's going to be cut short. So here he tells you what happened. An hour after Chatzos, Dahainu Aleph Iyar, the first hour, at 1 o'clock after Chatzos, without daylight savings time. So Chatzos is 12 o'clock without daylight savings time, and 1 o'clock is when you're coming to shul. Okay. What's koydin lebeis haknesses? What's calling to shul? So at the time, they used to shul clap and tell time to come to shul. People didn't have watches. Okay. After the Haftorah, we mentioned the neshamas again, the ones that were killed on that day, on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Then we read Av HaRachamim on Rosh Chodesh and do Yahalalu in the niggin of Av HaRachamim. Av HaRachamim had a niggin. The Yahalalu is in the niggin of Av HaRachamim. Okay, after Mincha, we don't daven Maariv like a regular, usually Mincha goes straight into Maariv. We don't do that because Mincha is very early now. So everyone goes home and everyone eats and drinks. And we have a Laharbais Basuda, after all it's Rosh Chodesh, and we have Yal V'Yavoy, and Berchas HaMazon. So it's a very gloomy first half of the day. Second half of the day, after Mincha, we break the fast. Okay, the Tenem Shalach Leves HaKnesses LaMaariv, before we go back from Maariv, the Shamash now takes away the Tisha B'Av Paroiches and the mantle and all of that, which was hanging there from Chav Gimel Iyar, and now he puts the ones for the days that you don't say Tachron. So the unique ones for the days that you don't say Tachron, and now because we're going into the days of Sivan, they put up those. Okay, now we come to a very important passage. What happens if Rosh Chodesh Sivan falls on Friday? What are you going to do if Rosh Chodesh Sivan falls on Friday? So you have a problem here. In the afternoon, you're not really supposed to go home on Friday afternoon and start eating a huge Suda. But you can't fast the whole day either, because it's Rosh Chodesh. So what are you going to do? So he tells us what they did. So then, Mamtinim Beishois, you wait 2 extra hours. I know Ad Gimel Oyer till 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock. The Koydin, the Beis, HaKnesses, and we invite everyone to shul, and we do everything that we did before, which means we daven Mincha, we have Kriyas HaTorah and all that. But then, Mispal and Takev Maariv Shal Shabbos. Right away, we daven Maariv for a Shabbos. So let's do the math over here. If it's 3 o'clock, and you'll see one of the other Rabbanim did, Mincha took 45 minutes. So that means, are they doing the Chunurana in the 69? I'm not sure. Probably they are, but I'm not sure. Maariv of Shabbos is when? Is, what did I say? 3:45. Right? 3:45. So 3:45, the davening Maariv. Okay, now, I was interested. When is Plaga Mincha on Rosh Chodesh Iyar and Sivan in Frankfurt? I'll go to the biggest city. So I checked. So it's 7:36 on our count. So on their count, it would be 6:36. So it's long before Plaga Mincha. So you're not really supposed to be davening Maariv before Plaga Mincha. This is what he did. And he's happy. He's very satisfied. He knows the din. He puts us in. They daven Maariv very, very early on that day. And then they went home and they had the Shabbos and everything like that. Okay. This led to a celebrated dispute between two the great Rabbanim who lived in the 1700s, Rabbi Yaakov Reisher and the Pnei Yeshua, as we will see. So first, Rabbi Yaakov Reisher. Rabbi Yaakov Reisher is known as a Shvus Yaakov, the Chok Yaakov, and Hilchas Pesach, and he was a Rav for many years in Prague. And then in the year 1715, he moved over to Worms, where he became the Rav in Worms. He didn't last there long. He was there for 3 years. Then he went on to the city of Metz, and that's where he lived out his final years. So in Shvus Yaakov, Chelek Beis and Vav, he says the following. It was the second year on the job, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, in the year 1716. And on that day, that year, Rosh Chodesh Sivan fell on Friday. And we fast here in Worms because of the Gzera that happened in 1096. But then the fast is only Achar Chatzos Hayoim. Fine. And then we have Sudas. What happens when it falls out on Erev Shabbos? What happens when it falls out on Friday? So they daven Mincha Maariv right away. After the third hour, Mechav Dalet Shois Achar Chatzos. I don't know what that means, but Shah Gimel Achar Chatzos. That I know what it means. Third hour after Chatzos. They daven Mincha at 3 o'clock, and then right away, after Mincha is Shabbos. So when I saw this, Tamatim Loid Aleim, Al Shem Espal and Tzir Zav, Shalei Bismana Kulahai. How do you daven Maariv so early? And I yelled at this. They didn't listen to me. Okay, you're coming to Worms. They're doing this for centuries. You really, this is very difficult to change these minhagim in Kehillas that have everything so documented. Okay, Vishamati Gam Rabbanim Kadmoinim Michu. I heard that earlier. Rabbanim also made a macha. We don't know who those people would have been because we don't have a record of it. But he says he heard. It didn't work. And now I'm afraid that future generations are going to say that the rabbis were okay with this. The great Shvus Yaakov was there, he didn't say anything, so it must mean it was okay. And then everyone's going to say, Allah Chaladoidis, you can start davening Maariv at 3 o'clock. So, he says, didn't daven with them. Lo yispalalti imam tfilas arvis, even though I do all the time. And they all came to me and they said, hey, Paidush Menat Tzibur, you shouldn't do it, it's our minig, and you don't have the right to change the minig. Okay. So he says, what's their taina? He brings a few tainas there from the Gemara. He says the Iker taina is that this is a minig that we're doing from the time of the Gzeira of Taf Nun Vav, and it's a minig for so many years. You can't be mavatal the minig because there's a concept that says minig oiker halacha, the minig overpowers the halacha. Well, he disagrees with that. He says if you have a minig that's mentioned in Shas, so then that minig that's mentioned in Shas could override a halacha that's earlier documented in Shas. That you can do. But you can't come when the Gemara says you need to do something. You can't come along and say, oh, we don't keep it. What does the Rambam say in his Hakdama over there? The Rambam says in the Hakdama that we're kaifa, every kehillah has to follow the din in the Gemara. He gives another scenario where minhagim are important. If you're not sure, is it din like this or is it din like that? There's a machlokes, there's two ways interpreting the Gemara. Then you follow the minig. But if something's a clear din in Shas, you can't say minig, mavatal halacha. This is what he says. Now he brings other tainis over there where the Kehillah brought certain passages of Gemara, said from here, it's evidence from here, and he said all of those are talking about an early Maariv, but after Plaga Mincha, so it is no evidence. Okay, now he doesn't want to end off here because so many saintly Jews living in Worms for so many years, you're just going to say they're all making this mistake. He can't do that. So he needs a way of framing this that, no, originally the Takana was good, and then it got messed up. And so, what's he going to do here? So he says, I don't want to be Moitzi Lazal or Rishonim. So he says, there were only Magdimin Ksas Liz Baal Maariv, which means Gimel Revi Shah B'Shah Hey, which would mean 4:45. So they're davening 4:45, which again in our time now would be 5:45 with daylight savings time. Is that correct? If 4:45 when Chatzos was 12, so it'll be 5:45. Okay, so that's what the original minig was, and there's b'doichik you could justify that. How could you justify that? Again, I said Plag HaMincha 7:36. It's still 2 hours short of Plag HaMincha. So he says, he makes a cheshbon that maybe you could, and bring some occurrence, that you could make a cheshbon of Plag HaMincha by an average day. Which means you don't have to, you take a 12 hour, you make a day into 12 hours, and you calculate the hours like that instead of, like this time of the year, an hour is 78 minutes or something like that. It's longer, and he thinks the math works out that if you do it by then maybe they're eking in their Maariv by that cheshbon in Plag HaMincha.
It's exact. If you do it that way, if it's 60 minutes.
Yeah.
So that 4:45 is exactly an hour and 15 minutes.
Beautiful. He says it's exact. I trust you. I trust you.
You're right.
So that's what he's saying. That's his cheshbon. Okay, and then he says, therefore they would call to shul 4 o'clock. And they would have a mincha and vayechal and haskaras neshamas and Av HaRachamim with the niggin, which is their minig, and this would take 45 minutes. And then they would daven Maariv. Daven Maariv 4:45. 4:45 gets you past Plag HaMincha in this new creative way of calculating Plag HaMincha. But then a mistake happened. We messed up 4 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And how could you say, how can you mess up an hour? He says, no, you see, the Rambam says in Ochas Eidos that if one aid says the mice happen at 3 and another one said at 4, you're not mavatal Eidos because it's normal for people to make a mistake about an hour. And he says, maybe that's what happened over here. Maybe that's what happened over here. Okay. Comes along the Pnei Yeshua. The Pnei Yeshua was in the Mamala Makom. Pnei Yeshua was in the Mamala Makom in Metz. And after the Shus Yaakov passed away in Metz, Pnei Yeshua took over. Pnei Yeshua at the end of his life, the last few years of his life, in the 1750s, lived in Worms as well. And in his Pirush, on Massacres Brachas, he quotes the Shus Yaakov and he says, V'ani amaditi mishtoimim al dvarav al shacht. What's all this noise to stop this mini Kaddish kazeh? It is close to say, meaning it's reasonable to say, that this minig predates Rashi and Tosfos. I don't know why he says that. It clearly you can make an argument it predates Tosfos, but it wouldn't predate Rashi because Rashi was alive at this period in time. Okay, but predates Talmidei Rashi and the Tosfos. Then he says another thing. What's the difference between what's going on in Worms and the item that's discussed in Trumas Hadeshen, Rabbi Yisrael Isserlin, Siman Aleph, has a famous tshuva. What's the tshuva? The tshuva is, the issue that under discussion there is, nothing to do with worms, and nothing to do with the Crusades, and nothing to do with fasts. The Metzias is that in many Kehillas they were davening Maariv before Plag HaMincha. This is what's happening. And so the shaila he's dealing with over there is, how is it mutter? And he says, look, I don't know for sure myself. The Pnei Yeshua summarizes, Loi matzah ba'al trumas hadeshen tambar. It doesn't have a compelling reason. But at the end of the day, he said, even a Talmud Chacham should not separate from the community if this is what they're doing, even lechatchila. Okay? So you should know that this is a whole dealing, because there are other places that discuss this issue. Some places the day is very long. Maariv, late, is a problem. Even after Plag HaMincha, could be troubling. Waiting for the real Zman is one thing. Even after Plag HaMincha is challenging, and a number of poskim discuss this issue. And they were matir here and there, one way or another. We're not getting into the sugya right now, what their heterim would have been. So he says, what's the difference if you're 3 or 4, if you're an hour? Mali gimel dalet shoys, mali hey vav shoys. So Trumas Hadeshen was talking about 3 or 4 hours before Nacht. And so if it's 3 or 4, what's the difference if it's 5 or 6? And therefore he doesn't have a problem with it. Now, what the Pnei Yeshua does do is he tries to make an argument that an hour and a half after Mincha Gdoila, you're good. An hour and a half after Mincha Gdoila, you're good. He discusses it and he says, but this is just to justify the minig. Then loses klam minig zeh. Rak in calls at the end. He says, but still you have to read Krishma again. Everyone has to read Krishma again after it says like Chavim Shema with the first 2 parshas of Shema, Shema v'hoya and Shemaya, or do Krishma Shalamita like a good Jew on your bed, and then you are okay. So it's really interesting. What was that?
Sphira also.
Oh, and Sphira. Yeah, I hear you. I don't know. They don't talk about Sphira. But it's really interesting because the din is like kind of straightforward. And Shus Yaakov, you can understand where he's coming from. Pnei Yeshua is defending the old minig and is saying, no, they had the right to do this in those years when it happened. They had the right to do this, and he defends it. And obviously, it's a much bigger sugya about Zmanim and about Maariv. And as I said, in some sources talk about it even in the context that it's not fast. But that's a very interesting expression of the problem as it surfaced on this fast of Rosh Chodesh Sivan. However, this fast was not going to live forever, and it ultimately met its demise apparently in the beginning of the 1800s. We hear about this from Rabbi Tzvi ben Yamin Auerbach, who was a Rav in Germany in the 1800s, and he published a sefer called Nachal Eshkol, which is a commentary on another sefer, but I can't get into that right now. Nachal Eshkol he published in 1868, and he writes over there as follows: Tiniest Tuf Nun Vav Ushar Gzeiros. There were fasts for other persecutions as well. A famous one, 1349, the poisoning of the wells. There was a fast in Worms and Adar for that persecution as well. Nizbatlu Zenun Shanim, we aren't doing it anymore. 50 years we aren't doing it. He published it in 1868. That brings you back to about 1818, so that period. I'll talk a little bit more about that period in a second. V'amar li Yahuv Nafshi Agoy Marino Arav Koppel Mil Worms. There was a rabbi at this time in Worms. His name was Koppel Halevi, Yaakov Koppel Halevi Bamberger, that he said that this is no different from the discussion in Gemara Rosh Hashanah about the three fasts. Which three fasts? Saying Gedaliah, Sarah B'Teves, and Shiva Asa B'Tammuz. Where the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says that actually, if we're not living during a period of Shmad, it's not obligatory to fast. Ratzu Misanim, Loi Ratzu Ein Misanim. It says Tisha B'Av, the Gemara says, no, you need to fast. But those other three that are involved with the Churban, saying Gedaliah, Sarah B'Teves, and Shiva Asa B'Tammuz, if it's not a time of Shmat, Ratzu, you want Misanin, Loi Ratzu Ein Misanin. Okay, but Poyol, the Rambam doesn't say that. The Rambam just says it's a fast. The Rambam doesn't say anything about that there's a way out. So we think that the Rambam means that it's a chiyuv. The Torah says, the Torah uses language that Av HaRachamim, no, that and ain't lozuz mimena. That you can't mess around with it. It's a minig, but you can't mess around with it. Fine. So he says, by these three fasts, although the Gemara said fast if you want, kiblu achar churban af ein shmad. We at some point in history we accepted it as an obligation. These that were for the last 800 years because of the persecutions. So here it's the same thing. In a time of persecution, fast. In a time of no persecution, you don't need to fast. We were never they never let go. The Gentiles are always persecuting us until modernity, till Zman HaChadosh, until this new period in time that we're in. In came Beratzin Tali, so now it's Tali in our Ratzin, and we never accepted it. We didn't say that we're holding on to it, and so therefore it was given up. So according to his testimony, sometime in the early 1800s, the Kehillah in Worms, what happened? One year, like, you know what, we're not fasting this year. Like, usually these things happen with a war or an expulsion. Or here, we don't know of anything. The truth is, there was war, but I don't know. He says that it happened sometime in the early 1800s. So there was the war of Napoleon at the time, and Napoleon did kind of bring, when he came to invaded these areas of Germany, he actually was mevatel all the discriminatory laws against Jews. And he said Jews have equality. And that's probably what he means over here when he says, Zman HaChadosh, this new time. What's funny about it is, though, that Napoleon is then defeated in the Battle of Waterloo. And then what happens is that things revert back, and there's this German Confederation that begins in 1815 or something like that. And they roll back everything, and they roll back the persecution, and they roll back the discrimination against Jews in terms of citizenship or whatever. So I don't know exactly when this would have happened or whatever, but this new feeling of Napoleon or whatever it is gave people the feeling that I guess they don't need to fast. And so people stopped fasting. And with that, this fast of Rosh Chodesh and the fast of Chav Gimel and the Mayans fast, assuming it lasted that long, also disappeared from the pages of history. But as we spoke about before, there's other things that are still going on. The minig of Av HaRachamim is still a reflection of this period in time. And likewise, if the Taz's point about Avelos in the second half of Sfiras Omer is to be embraced, so then that's another aspect where we're still observing these terrible persecutions that happened at that time. Just going to conclude briefly Tavshim Mem Gimel, Shabbos Mevarchim Sivan, the Rebbe spoke about the fact that we say Av HaRachamim never on Shabbos Mevarchim, and only Mevarchim Sivan, and that's a big downer. And so there has to be a more positive way of framing the concept of Av HaRachamim. The Kud the Rebbe spoke about was that when we memorialize those who've passed away, and when we say Av HaRachamim or something like that, you could think about it in two ways. There's the traditional way, but then there's another way of thinking about it. The traditional way is something really bad happened, so therefore halacha says yefashpesh b'maisav, let me do tshuva to ensure that negative things don't happen anymore again. So then it's very much a downer, if that's what it is. If it's yefashpesh b'maisav, that a person should be self-analyzing and scrutinizing to see whether they need to use this sad event as a trigger for tshuva, so then the whole thing feels like a very negative thing, which was why we're not going to do Av HaRachamim on a regular Shabbos Mevarchim when we want to be b'simcha. But then there's another way of thinking about a tainus, for example, and that is the idea that a tainus, when Mashiach comes, could turn into a Yom Simcha. So he says, Al derech zeh, Av HaRachamim could be framed not so much as, hey, you better shape up, but it could be framed in a different way. The opening words are Av HaRachamim. Kabbalah explains that Av HaRachaman is small measure of Rachmanis. Av HaRachamim is abundance of Rachmanis, so much Rachmanis of Hashem that it even turns negative into positive. And the Rebbe focused on the words in Av HaRachamim. We say Hanehavim v'Haneimim, that what we're asking for, that what we're hoping for and what we're praying for is a new world in where everything's nehavim and everything's ne'imim, so much so that even the negative of the past gets flipped into nehavim and ne'imim. And so that's very different. That's a different narrative than saying, hey, serious time, something bad happened, do tshuva. Now it's a different message. It's a message of we're looking forward to blig vol rachamim, and we're looking for a time in where negativity gets transformed into nehavim and into ne'imim. So when we say Av HaRachamim on Shabbos Mevarchim, Chodesh Sivan, which is supposed to be a happy time, so then we have a right to have in mind this second approach rather than the first approach. That's the words that the Rebbe said on that time, Shabbos Mevarchim Sivan Tavshin Mem Gimel.